They say the mountain decides what it keeps. I didn't believe that until I watched a man walk into fog and never walk out. It was early July, and Mount Rainier still held patches of snow above 6,000 feet. I'd been hiking solo for a week, moving slow, taking photos of wildflowers and glaciers. The air was thin and metallic, carrying that smell of cold granite and pine needles crushed under boots. I reached the ridge trail around midday. The forecast had said light cloud cover, but by the time I got to the switchbacks, a blanket of fog was crawling up the slope like smoke. It was thick, the kind that hides the world 5 steps ahead. That's where I met him. He looked mid-40s, tall, wearing an old green rain jacket and carrying a pack that had seen years of use. He was heading the same direction I was, moving steady but unhurried. We exchanged that small hiker's nod, the universal hello of the trail. "You heading toward Mirror?" he asked. "Yeah, trying to beat the fog." He smiled faintly. "You won't." We fell into step for a while. Conversation came easy, weather, trail conditions, where we'd camped last night. His name was Mark. He said he was doing a solo loop for a week, same as me. When the fog closed in, it came fast. One moment the trees had depth, and the next the world flattened into a wall of gray. We stopped near a fork where the main trail curved left along the ridge and a faint side path cut down toward a creek. Mark pulled out a paper map. He said, "This shortcut drops back to the main trail later." I shook my head. "That's not marked on GPS." He said, "It's old, been using it for years. You can follow the sound of the creek." I hesitated. The fog had turned the woods into ghosts, trees dissolving as soon as you looked away. I said, "I'll stick to the main trail." He nodded. "Fair enough. See you down there." And then he stepped into the fog. I watched him walk maybe 10 steps before his outline blurred. Another 2, and he was gone. Not vanished in a blink, just absorbed, like the mountain exhaled and took him in. I waited, expecting to hear him again, the crunch of gravel, a snapped branch, but there was nothing. The air was dead quiet, even the wind gone still. 5 minutes passed, 10. I called out, "Hey Mark, you make it down?" Silence. The fog thickened until I could barely see my boots. I turned back toward the main trail and forced myself to keep walking. There's something about being alone in fog that makes your mind play tricks. You think you hear footsteps behind you or whispers carried by the mist. I've been out enough times to know those are echoes, usually. But this didn't sound like echoes. Once, about 20 minutes later, I heard what I swore was his voice, faint, maybe 30 yards behind me. It said, "It's clear here." I stopped. "Mark?" No answer. I stood still until my heart stopped hammering, then moved on. The fog pressed tighter, almost humming in my ears. When I reached the next clearing, the clouds began to thin. Light filtered through like smoke lifting after a fire. The view opened. Glacier lines, wildflower meadows, and the faint shimmer of the creek below. I waited there for him to appear. I thought maybe he had taken the shortcut and would rejoin the main trail here. He never did. By dusk, I reached a ranger hut and decided to stay nearby. Another hiker was already there, an older guy, calm, talkative in that quiet backcountry way. I told him about the fog, about the man I had met. He frowned. "You said green jacket, older model pack?" "Yeah." He nodded slowly. "You might want to tell the rangers tomorrow." "Why?" "Because there was a guy by that name went missing last year in the same area. They searched weeks, never found a trace." I laughed it off at first. Coincidence, same name, same colored jacket. But he wasn't joking. He even described the exact model, old green marmot, patched at the shoulder. I didn't sleep much that night. Next morning, I reported it. The ranger took notes, calm but careful. When I mentioned the side trail, she paused. He said, "There's no maintained side trail off that ridge. There was an old route decades ago, but the slope collapsed. It's closed now." She asked me to mark the spot on the map. When I did, her expression tightened. He said that's exactly where he disappeared last year. I hiked out that afternoon under clear skies. The mountain looked harmless again. Blue ridges, soft light on snow fields. But I couldn't shake that image. A man in a green jacket, stepping into fog and not coming out. A week later, I got a call from the ranger office. They'd checked the area. No new tracks, no signs of disturbance, no gear. Just fog again that same evening, rolling in from the valley. I never told anyone else. It's the kind of story people smile politely at and forget, the kind that sounds like myth. But sometimes, when low clouds drift through the evergreens, I think about how he said, "You won't beat the fog," and how somewhere between the sound of the creek and the trail that isn't there anymore, a man named Mark is still walking, step after step, deeper into the mountain's breath.
We cleared the tent together, slow. No person, 2 bags, 2 sets of clothes, 2 toothbrushes, still damp, 2 pairs of camp sandals, both under the vestibule. No boots missing, no shoes thrown on quick, just bare feet in the prints outside and a pair of socks inside out near the door like someone had peeled them off to feel the sand. "How long?" she asked. "An hour," I said. "Less? Coffee's still warm. Sausage would have finished if it had another minute." She crouched by the prints. 1 set. "Yeah. Male? Female?" I shrugged. "Could be either. The length, maybe 10 inches? Broad. Feels like a guy. I hate guessing. The river steals certainty." We worked the site slow. Found wallets in a zipped pocket of 1 pack. A couple from Richmond, 31 and 30. Permit stub matched their names. Their car would be up top at the trailhead lot. Buchanan went to make the call while I stayed with the site. I kept expecting laughter on the trail, the shout, "We're back!" That happens. People wander off to look at a heron and lose track of time. They come back sheepish, apologizing for the worry. No one did. I kept going back to the waterline. The prints met the river and stopped. Sometimes you can see where someone hesitated, the way the toes dig a little before the first cold shock. I saw no pause. The last print is mid-stride, heel just kissing the sand, and then nothing. If he waited, the silt should have roiled, puddled, left that cloudy mirror along the edge. The edge was clean. The river red as if no one had disturbed it. Upstream, I found one more thing, a bent willow where something had brushed hard enough to leave wet streaks, human height. Downstream, in the eddy, a pale thing turned, then wasn't there again. My heart jumped. It was a cooler lead, not a face. I picked it out with a stick and set it by a log. The day went long with officials, and then longer with family. We walked the banks in grids. We called, waited, called again. Swiftwater crews checked the obvious strainers. Nothing. The phone on the rock never lit up. The book, Bird Guide, stayed open to a page with herons, a pencil line under great blue. By evening, thunder stacked up for real. The first heavy drops came warm, then cold, then thick enough to blur the opposite bank. The river swelled an inch before our eyes. Somewhere behind me, Buchanan said quietly, "Pack what's theirs, we'll secure the rest." I folded the tent. The jacket I'd seen draped over the door was heavier than it should have been. The pockets held a park map and 2 cough drops. I placed it in a dry bag with their names on tape and sealed it. Something about that simple seal felt more final than I wanted. On my last pass, I caught my toe on something at the water's lip. A shell? A root? No, a small flat rock someone had set deliberately. Beneath it, pressed into the sand, a circle made with a fingertip. Not big, the size of a mug rim. In the center, a dot. It could have been nothing. It felt like a mark you'd make to remember where to put your heel before stepping. I didn't mention it. I don't know why. Maybe because it sounded like a ghost story detail, and the families don't deserve ghost stories. They deserve facts. We hiked out in rain that turned the trail to a ribbon of chocolate. At the trailhead lot, their cars sat beaded with water, park pass tucked on the dash. Buchanan opened it with a key from the permit envelope. Inside, a grocery list, a pack of gum, 2 water bottles. Nothing that told us anything except that 2 people had planned to eat grilled sausage by a river and never did. I still walk that corridor. I still pick fishing line out of the roots and cut old hooks from branches where kids practice bad casts. And sometimes when the river has that brown weight and the sky presses low, I find myself standing where those prints ended, listening for voices across the water. I never hear any. But once, early before sun, the river thinned enough that I could see stones 3 feet down. On the bottom, a ring of smooth pebbles sat together in a circle I swear hadn't been there the week before. No dot in the middle, just a circle, patient, refusing to be washed apart. I tell myself it was kids. I tell myself a lot of things. The river doesn't argue. It keeps what it keeps and moves on.
The distress beacon came through just after noon. 3 short bursts on a frequency reserved for emergencies. It wasn't unusual out there in Denali. Hikers rented those little orange transmitters all the time, usually for sprained ankles or lost gear. But what was strange was the location. Mile 42, middle of nothing. No marked trail, no ranger route. Just miles of tundra and talus leading into glacial cliffs. I was working a volunteer search rotation that summer, attached to a ranger team out of Toklat. They handed me the coordinates, told me to move fast, but careful. The signal was still active, bouncing off the satellite every 15 minutes. I left the road and started cross-country, the wind sharp with rain. The tundra here isn't smooth like people think. It's lumpy, soft in some spots, sharp rock in others. Every step feels half-anchored. The signal tone pinged on my receiver, faint but steady, just enough to keep me aimed right. After an hour, the weather turned. Gray clouds dragged across the ridge, and the rain came thin and cold. I checked the coordinates. The beacon had moved. Not far, maybe 200 yards downslope. Moving beacon means a conscious person. That gave me a jolt of hope. I radioed the update. Static answered.
typical for this range. I kept going. The terrain got worse. Loose stone, slick moss, thin streams threading through shale. The beacon beeped again, closer. I crested a rise and froze. Below me, the slope dropped into a shallow basin. Across it, I saw something, a faint orange flash through the rain. Maybe the beacon itself, or just gear reflecting light. I started down fast, slipping twice before catching myself on a root. Halfway there, the tone jumped again. The coordinates updated, now a few hundred yards farther north, near the base of a cliff. That didn't make sense. Nobody could move that quickly across this terrain without leaving tracks, and I'd seen none. The sky darkened to slate. Thunder rolled far off. I picked up my pace. At the base of the cliff, I found the first sign of someone. A single trekking pole wedged between rocks, wrist strap torn. A few feet away, a boot print, sharp-edged in mud, not even half an hour old. The beacon pinged again, now reading almost directly above me. I looked up. The cliff wasn't high, maybe 50 feet, but steep, jagged, streaked with rainwater. And halfway up, stuck in a narrow ledge of gravel, was something small and orange. The beacon. It blinked steadily, the LED cutting through the drizzle like a heartbeat. Base, I've located the device. No visual on the subject. Static hissed. Then, a broken voice. Copy. Safe to retrieve. I said stand by. I started climbing. Slow, deliberate. The rock was slick. My gloves soaked through. Every few feet I tested the holds, pulled upward. When I reached the ledge, the rain thickened into sleet. The beacon sat there upright, balanced carefully as if placed. No strap, no scratches, no sign of impact. I picked it up. The ID code still broadcast, the GPS steady. Whoever owned it hadn't turned it off. That's when I noticed the second light. Just below the ledge, maybe 15 feet down, a reflection blinked through the rain, faint, white, rhythmic. At first, I thought it was my own headlamp bouncing back. Then it flashed twice, paused, flashed again, perfectly even. Base, I have a possible second source of light, I said into the radio. No reply. The light blinked again, slower this time, then went dark. I stayed still, gripping the rock. Rain hissed down the cliff face, gathering in runnels. The beacon in my hand kept its silent pulse, steady, unbothered. Then the receiver tone changed, signal lost. I checked the screen, no coordinates, just a dead zone. That shouldn't happen while holding an active beacon. I tapped it, shook it, nothing. The LED still blinked, but no data. When I looked down again, the reflection was gone. By the time I made it back to the basin, light was fading. I set up my bivvy under a boulder and called it in again. The radio finally caught a signal. Base to 4D, say position. Approx 1 click east of mile 42. Retrieved beacon, no contact. Coordinates stopped updating mid-climb. Silence. Then, copy. Your sure device is functional? LED active, yes. They told me to stay put until morning. Weather was worsening and they'd send a team at first light. I sat in the dark, rain pattering on the tarp, staring at the beacon's faint pulse. Every few minutes it flickered stronger, then weaker, like it was breathing. Sometime after midnight, I heard movement outside, stones sliding, just once, then again, closer. I clicked on my lamp and unzipped the flap. The rain had stopped. The whole basin was white with fog. Nothing moved. I called out, "Hello?" My voice bounced off the cliffs. Then, maybe imagination, I heard it answered. A single echo, lower, slower, but but shaped exactly like my own. They found me the next morning, sitting where I'd been, beacon in my lap. The tech guys later said it had stopped transmitting around midnight, no reason they could find, just ended. No hiker was ever reported missing that week. The ID tag matched a rental, but the company swore it hadn't been checked out in months. When I checked the ledge again 2 days later, I found a second trekking pole wedged where the first had been. Same model, same make, same strap torn in the same place. I don't hike solo anymore. And sometimes, when my GPS stutters, I still half expect to hear that steady tone, something out there calling back, pretending it's just lost.
I grew up in the Ouachitas, where the woods feel different from other forests, denser, quieter, like sound doesn't travel right. Pine Hollow was one of those forgotten places, a shallow valley off an unmarked dirt road used by hunters in the 90s and left to grow wild. The brothers came out every November, same as clockwork. Jake and Ryan Marin, locals, mid-30s, lifelong hunters. They'd take a long weekend, set up their canvas tent by the creek, and haul back venison before Sunday church. People liked them, quiet types, reliable, never reckless. The year they vanished, the weather was perfect. Cold nights, clear mornings, no storms to blame. They checked in at the ranger station Friday at dawn. By Monday, their truck was still parked at the trailhead. That's when I went looking. I was a junior ranger then, helping with trail maintenance. The senior ranger, Weller, led the search. We followed the old track through scrub pine until we found their campsite. Everything looked ordinary at first glance. Tent pitched square, folding chairs, cooler half full of ice water, a camp stove still set up. But something was wrong with the fire ring. Inside it, the wood had burned halfway, leaving uncharred ends pointed outward like the fire had died mid-burn. No wind, no rain, no reason it should have gone out so clean. Ryan's jacket hung from a branch. Jake's boots sat by the creek. One rifle leaned against a tree, safety on. The other was gone. We split up. Weller took the ridge. I followed the creek north. The banks were muddy but showed only one set of fresh tracks, barefoot, wide stride, heading upstream. I crouched, studying them. The toe marks dug deep like someone had been moving fast but silent. "Jake!" I yelled. My voice bounced around the hollow and came back softer, blurred by distance. Then I heard something else. My name. It came faintly through the trees, low but clear. "Eli!" I shouted back. It sounded like Ryan's voice. I'd met him before. "Ryan, you okay?" I shouted back. Silence. Then again, closer. "Eli, over here!" I followed the creek bend, heart hammering, rifle slung over my shoulder. The trees thickened, the ground turning to slick clay. I rounded the bend and found nothing but a shallow pool where the water stilled. No tracks, no movement. Then the voice came again, but this time it didn't sound like Ryan anymore. It sounded like me. Same pitch, same cadence, calling from farther away now. "Eli, over here!" My stomach dropped. I froze, every hair on my neck standing up. The woods went dead quiet. No birds, no wind, just a faint drip of water. I backed away slow, eyes scanning the trees. When I got back to camp, Weller was there, staring into the tent. "What'd you find?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he pointed inside. There were 2 sleeping bags, One zipped up tight. The other was gone. And beside the one still there lay a second rifle, the missing one. Barrel clean, chamber empty. The safety had been switched off. We called in more rangers that afternoon. By dusk, we had a dozen people combing the hollow. We followed boot prints up the slope and lost them in a mess of pine needles. Dogs tracked scent for half a mile before stopping at a dry wash, circling, whining. No sign of either brother. By nightfall, the fog rolled in, dense, gray, thick as smoke. The air felt heavy, muffled. The search team pulled back until morning. When the sun came up, everything looked ordinary again. No fog, no movement, just damp grass shining with dew. We spread out along the ridge. That's when I saw it. A flannel sleeve caught in a briar patch. Red and black pattern. I tugged it free. It was torn, wet, still smelled faintly of wood smoke. 10 yards away, under a fallen pine, we found Ryan. Face down, peaceful, like he'd just lain down and gone to sleep. No wounds, no struggle, no sign of panic. His hands were clean. Jake was never found. The coroner ruled exposure, though the temperature never dropped low enough to kill a man wearing layers. The radio reports said they probably got separated after dark, one disoriented, one trying to find him. But here's what I never told anyone. That night, after they called off the search, I went back to the creek. Couldn't shake what I'd heard. I stood by the water's edge, the same bend where the voice had called my name. The fog was back, thicker than before, coiling low over the surface. I was about to turn away when I heard a splash. Gentle, close. I raised my flashlight. 2 sets of footprints pressed side by side in the mud, both bare, both fresh. They led into the fog where the creek bent out of sight. I followed 5 steps before the beam caught the edge of water rippling like someone had just stepped in. Then it stilled. Nothing, just mist, and my own voice whispering back at me from somewhere I couldn't see. Eli! Over here! When the blizzard started, I was still 5 miles from the trailhead. Wind came down the canyon like a freight train, heavy, roaring, full of needles of ice. My compass spun, GPS flickered, and I realized fast that visibility was dropping to 0. The only thing worse than being lost in the sawtooths in winter is being lost at night in a storm. That's when I saw the cabin. It appeared through the white like something half remembered. The roof buried in snow, the door hanging slightly open, smoke pipe crooked but intact. The kind of structure built decades ago by trappers and left for whoever needed it. I pushed through thigh-deep drifts and stumbled up to the porch. The door creaked when I nudged it open. Inside was dark, but not abandoned. A lantern burned low on the table. A sleeping bag was unrolled by the stove. A pot of melted snow sat half full on the grate, still steaming faintly. Whoever was here had just stepped out, maybe to gather wood, maybe to relieve himself. "Hello?" I called. No answer, just wind hammering the roof. I closed the door behind me and stood there dripping meltwater, unsure what to do. You don't just take over someone's shelter, but leaving wasn't an option. I hung my jacket, fed the stove, and waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. No one came back. I finally convinced myself to sit by the fire. The warmth felt unreal, almost too good. I pulled off my boots and rubbed my feet until the sting faded. That's when I noticed the wall. Above the stove, carved into the wood with something sharp, was a line of words. If the light's on, don't stay. I stared at it, heart starting to thud again. Maybe a joke, I thought. Maybe some hiker's idea of dark humor. But there was another carving below it, smaller letters, deeper. Cabin 12. There weren't any numbered cabins out here, just backcountry shelters, none mapped. Wind screamed outside. The snow against the window looked alive, swirling like smoke. I tried the radio, got nothing but static. A few minutes later, something bumped the door. Just once, then again, harder. I grabbed my headlamp and moved quietly to the table. The lantern flame flickered as if caught in a draft, though the door was tight. Another thump, not random, but steady, like someone knocking. I called out, "Hello? You can come in!" The knocking stopped. Silence filled the room so completely it made my ears ring. I waited. The storm howled outside, the kind of sound that eats distance. You can't tell if something's right next to you or 100 yards away. After a while, I sat again. The warmth from the stove lulled me, exhaustion pulling me under. When I woke, the lantern had gone out. The fire was nearly dead, glowing faintly orange. I fumbled for my flashlight and froze. The door was open. Snow dusted the floor in a perfect line, leading from the threshold halfway to the stove and then stopping. No boot prints, no drag marks, just that thin white path, as if snow had fallen in a shape that walked halfway and vanished. I turned the beam toward the wall. The carvings looked sharper in the flashlight's glare, the letters darker. The wood beneath them seemed freshly cut, as though they'd been made that night. Then I heard breathing. Behind me. Slow. Even. Like someone trying not to make noise. I spun around, the beam swept over the room. Table, stove, doorway. Empty. The sound stopped. I stepped to the door, heart pounding. Outside, the storm had calmed, flakes drifting soft and vertical. The snow on the porch was undisturbed except for a single set of prints. Mine. When I turned back inside, the lantern was burning again. Bright, clean, no smoke, no smell. The pot on the stove steamed like it had just been filled. I didn't stay. I grabbed my pack and bolted into the snow, not caring which way was east anymore. The cold hit like knives, but I didn't stop until the light faded behind me. It took 6 hours to reach the ranger outpost, frost-bitten and shaking. They said there was no cabin in that section of the range. Not for 20 miles. A week later, a rescue pilot spotted something during a clear run, a dark shape in the trees, half buried in snow. When they went to check, the site was empty. Just collapsed logs, no roof, no stove, no tracks. But in the snow nearby, one thing stood out. A single upright lantern, still warm to the touch, burning steady against the wind.
The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days, and the back roads of the Adirondacks were turning into rivers of mud. I was all in a load of timber south, easing the rig along a narrow stretch locals called the Black Run. No cell signal, no houses for 20 miles, just trees and fog. It was near midnight when I saw her. A woman walking along the shoulder, head down, soaked through. Her hair clung to her face, and she wore a pale jacket that glowed white in my headlights. At first I thought she might be one of the hikers caught in the weak storms, maybe trying to get back to town. I slowed the truck and pulled up beside her, rolling down the window. "You all right, ma'am?" I called over the rain. She stopped, but didn't look up right away. When she did, her expression was blank. Not scared, not confused, just empty. "You need a ride?" I asked. She nodded once, no hesitation. I unlocked the passenger side and leaned across to push it open. She climbed in without a word, water dripping from her sleeves. Her hands were red from the cold. I turned the heat up, tried to keep my voice casual. "Rough night to be walking. You get stuck somewhere?" She looked straight ahead. "Car broke down," she said. Her voice was quiet, flat. "Where at?" "Just up the road," she said, "around the bend." I nodded and eased back onto the road. The wipers fought the rain, thumping slow. After a minute, I glanced over. She was staring out the windshield, face pale in the dashboard light. Something about her looked off. Not scared, not tired, just detached. "What's your name?" I asked. She didn't answer. I tried again. "You from around here?" Still nothing. Just that soft sound of rain running down her coat. A few bends later, she said suddenly, "You can stop now." I glanced around. The road was still deep in forest. No lights anywhere. "You sure? There's no—" "Here," she said again, firmer. I pulled over. The engine idled, headlights washing over trees. She opened the door and stepped out, not even glancing back. Rain poured down, flattening her hair against her back. I leaned toward the window. "You want me to wait?" But she was already gone, swallowed by the dark beyond the shoulder. I sat there a few seconds, then put the truck in park and climbed out with my flashlight. The rain hit like needles. I swept the beam over the road. Nothing. The trees pressed in close, heavy with water. No tracks, no movement, not even the sound of footsteps retreating. I called out, "Ma'am!" Silence. After a minute, I gave up and got back in the cab. The seat was wet where she'd been, water dripping onto the floor mat. Her footprints still showed faintly on the rubber. I drove on, uneasy, half watching the mirrors. 10 minutes later, I saw her car. It sat half off the road, an old blue sedan, hazard lights faintly blinking through the rain. I slowed and pulled alongside. The door was open, the interior lights dead. The inside looked untouched, purse on the seat, thermos in the cup holder, keys still in the ignition. I called out again, shining the flashlight around. Nothing. I radioed it in to dispatch. They told me to stay put until a deputy came through. By the time he arrived, the rain had eased into a mist. We checked the area together. The ditch, the woods, no tracks except mine. He ran the plates. The car belonged to a woman from Glens Falls, mid-30s, reported missing 2 days earlier. He looked at me like maybe I'd gotten confused, maybe I saw something else in the rain. But when he shined his light through my window, he saw it too. A faint wet outline on the passenger seat, shaped like someone had sat there recently, water rain pooling in the dip of the cushion. We both stared at it. By morning, the car was towed. The seat dried. No trace of her ever turned up. They searched for a week. Helicopters, dogs, the whole thing. Found nothing. But here's the part I can't shake. 2 days later, I had to run the same route again. It was raining, lighter this time, the road slick and quiet. As I rounded that same bend, my radio crackled, faint, broken. A voice came through, distorted by static, almost drowned by the hum of the wipers. "Can you stop now?" it said. Just that. 3 words. I pulled over and sat there with the engine idling, the forest dripping around me. Didn't move. Didn't breathe. When I finally looked to my right, the passenger seat was dry. No outline, no sign she'd ever been there. But the air smelled faintly of rain and cold perfume. And in the mirror, for half a second, I thought I saw a pale shape walking just ahead of my headlights, moving the same direction I was going. Slow, steady, unhurried. Then she was gone.
I was 19 that summer, working as a youth camp counselor in the Rockies. Our site sat in a basin surrounded by pine ridges, with the river a 10-minute hike away. We had 6 tents for the kids, 1 for staff, and a fire circle in the middle, where every night we told ghost stories that were never supposed to feel real. Until one night, one did. The counselor who vanished was named Aaron. He was 23, calm, the kind of guy who made you think nothing bad could happen around him. He led the hiking group that took Trail 9 across the river every morning. 3 miles there, 3 back, easy. That day started normal. Bright, clear, cold air that smelled like sun-warmed pine. The kids left with him at 9. By noon, the sky went gray. Mountain storms moved fast. Thunder rolled before we saw clouds. They turned around immediately, but Aaron stayed behind to grab the last pack. He told the group to keep going. They came back without him. At first, we weren't worried. It's easy to lose 10 minutes on the trail, but half an hour passed, then an hour. By the time rain started, we knew something was wrong. We radioed park rangers, and by nightfall, a small search team gathered at camp. We kept the kids in their tents, told them stories, promised everything was fine. The forest was pitch black beyond the circle of lanterns. At 10 p.m., the first call came through the walkie. We've got a voice. A male voice shouting from across the canyon that ran west of our camp. Rangers said it sounded like Aaron calling for help, faint but clear. I stepped outside the tent and listened. Over here! It echoed through the dark, bouncing off rock and rain. I swear I recognized his tone, the same calm urgency he used when he wanted the kids to hurry up. But the canyon was half a mile wide, and there was no bridge that direction, just cliffs and cold air. The rangers shouted back, but no response came. Only that same phrase again, minutes later. Over here! Exactly the same pitch, exactly the same distance. They marked the direction and planned to search at first light. We didn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., the voice came again, closer this time. It seemed to circle the camp, echoing from different sides of the ridge. Sometimes it sounded like it came from the tree line above the tents, sometimes from far down the riverbed. Each time it said the same thing. Over here. One of the kids woke crying, said he saw a light between the trees, a small lantern moving slow just beyond the last tent. When I went to look, there was nothing but fog rising off the ground. By dawn, the voice had stopped. Rangers searched for 5 days. They found where Aaron had last been, a slick patch of trail beside a creek crossing. One boot print sliding into mud. No sign he'd fallen in, no torn branches, no tracks leading away, just gone. The canyon on the other side was checked too. Nothing. The official report said, likely accident, unrecovered. Camp reopened 2 weeks later. I stayed on, though nights felt longer. The kids kept asking if we'd found him. We said no, but told him he probably hiked out another route. Then one evening, near sunset, the mountains went silent. No birds, no wind. I was collecting wood when I heard a man's voice across the clearing. Over here,
I froze. It wasn't far, maybe 30 yards into the pines. I looked up and saw the faint glow of a light between the trunks. It moved slow, side to side, like someone walking with a lantern. I called back, "Aaron?" No answer. The light drifted deeper into the forest. I followed for maybe 50 feet before it disappeared, swallowed by dusk. When I turned around, camp looked farther away than it should have been. That's when I heard it again, right behind me, close enough that I felt the breath of it. Over here. The voice was mine. I ran until the trees opened. I quit the next morning, packed my gear before the sun came up. On my last day, one of the rangers, older guy named Dalton, stopped by. He handed me an envelope with the final report copy. Doesn't add up, does it? I shook my head. He pointed to a note scribbled on the back of the report. That's my handwriting from night 2 of the search. It read, "Voice heard calling from opposite ridge. Answered itself." Dalton looked at me and said, "You heard it too, didn't you?" I didn't answer. Sometimes, when storms hit these mountains and thunder rolls down the canyons, people report voices calling across the valleys, repeating their own words a second later, a little out of sync. Rangers call it camp echo now. I still hear it in my sleep sometimes. A man's voice I used to trust, steady and calm, forever calling from somewhere just out of sight. Over here.
It snowed all night in the Bridgers, thick, steady flakes that turned the whole world white and soundless. By dawn, the sky cleared, leaving everything crisp, frozen, and too quiet. The search started just after sunrise. A 22-year-old student had gone missing overnight. He'd left his rental cabin to take photos of the snowfall, according to a note left on the counter. That was around 9 p.m. By 7 a.m., he hadn't returned. I joined the rescue team as one of the local volunteers. 6 of us set out from the cabin. Snow up to our knees, radio contact every 30 minutes. The air was so cold, the breath from our masks froze into frost. We found his first footprints less than half a mile up the trail. Clear, neat, single file. Each step sharp-edged, perfect. Fresh, one of the rangers said, probably after midnight. We followed him easily. No side tracks, no stumbles, just one clean set heading uphill toward the ridge. The kid had been walking steady, confident. After about 2 hours, the prints led us into a meadow ringed with fir trees. The snow there was untouched except for his trail, straight across the open ground. We paused to rest, radios crackling with static. That's when one of the guys, Denny, frowned and said, "You hear that?" At first I thought he meant the wind, but there wasn't any. Then I heard it too, a faint crunch, crunch, somewhere ahead, slow and even, like footsteps pressing snow. But nothing moved in front of us. We waited. The sound faded, then stopped. Denny muttered, "Probably echoing from our own." Except none of us were moving. We kept going. The tracks cut across the meadow toward the far tree line. Every print was still perfect. No snow drift, no fill-in, even though the fall had stopped hours ago. It looked like he'd made them minutes earlier. At the edge of the trees, the line of prints began to change. The spacing grew shorter, like he'd slowed down, hesitated. Then one step angled sideways, another half turned back. "Maybe he realized he was lost," I said. The ranger nodded. or heard something. A few steps later, the track straightened again and led directly onto the frozen surface of a small lake. We stopped at the edge. The ice was white and glassy, dusted with snow. His footprints continued across, perfectly centered, each one distinct. Halfway out, they ended. Just stopped. No sign of a fall, no break in the surface, no hole. The ice beyond was smooth and flawless, blank all the way to the far bank. We spread out, probing carefully with poles. Solid ice everywhere, not a crack. One of the men said quietly, he couldn't have turned around. We'd see the return prints. We circled the shore, scanning for anything. Glove, scarf, indentation, nothing. The print stopped in the middle of the lake like someone had simply stepped upward and vanished. The ranger called it in. Command told us to mark the site and pull back until sonar could arrive. We stood there a long time, none of us talking. I remember the light, bright but flat, no warmth, the kind of sunlight that makes everything look too clean. Then I heard it again. Crunch, crunch. This time, it came from behind us. We all turned. The snow behind our group was untouched, not a single print. The sound came again, closer, deliberate. The ranger raised a hand. Nobody move. We waited. The sound stopped after the third step. That silence afterward felt heavier than the cold. Denny finally whispered, "We're leaving." No one argued. They brought sonar equipment that afternoon. Nothing under the ice. No body, no gear, no air pockets, just 12 inches of clear, solid lake. The official report called it a likely misstep near the bank, followed by submersion, even though there was no hole to match that theory. I went back 2 days later with another volunteer to flag the area. Overnight, a new snow had fallen, smooth, untouched, until we reached the lake. Across the surface, faintly pressed into the powder, was the same line of prints, starting again at the bank, perfectly spaced, leading halfway out, and stopping at the exact same point. I stepped closer. The prints were shallow this time, like someone walking on air just above the ice. My partner didn't want to look. He turned back for the truck, muttering, "We're not supposed to be out here." I stood a moment longer, staring at the last print. The snow inside it was untouched, still loose, like it hadn't been compressed at all. Then faintly, under the stillness, I heard one more sound. A single crunch, far out over the lake. Then silence. That was 2 winters ago. They never found him, not even in the thaw. Sometimes when I hike that ridge and the snow's clean and new, I look out over that frozen meadow and swear I see faint tracks glinting across the ice, like someone still walking, step by step, careful not to fall through.